Lions Nation! Everything surrounding this Lions offseason can be traced back to one uncomfortable reality that fans have felt building for weeks. This roster, as currently constructed, reached its limit, and the evidence is sitting right in front of us. What you are watching is not just the end of a season, it is an organization entering a forced evaluation phase, where every position, every contract, and every decision is under the microscope. When you strip away emotion and focus strictly on what has been said and shown, the picture becomes very clear. The Lions are heading into an offseason where tough choices are unavoidable, especially in the trenches and on defense. Smash the like button to support the channel, and if possible, leave a comment saying, "Go Lions!" Based on the information laid out, the offensive line immediately stands out as a priority and a point of concern. Frank Ragnow is retired, and there is no expectation of a return. Jared Goff himself addressed the situation publicly, stating that he does not believe Ragnow is coming back at all. That door is essentially closed. When Ragnow briefly returned, the hamstring injury only reinforced why the organization must move in a different direction. This is no longer about nostalgia or hoping for one more run. It is about durability, availability, and future stability. The idea of moving forward without Ragnow forces Detroit to confront reality instead of delaying it. That reality extends beyond center. Taylor Decker's future is now a legitimate question, not speculation pulled from thin air. There is a strong belief that Decker may retire, driven by accumulated wear, physical toll, and the mental side that comes with long-term injuries. When a player reaches the point where retirement starts living in their head, it often becomes inevitable. If that happens, the Lions would be forced to address tackle early in the draft. While painful in the short term, it would accelerate a full reset of the offensive line and push the team toward a younger, more sustainable unit. This is where the discussion around Tyler Linderbaum becomes central. He is viewed as the top free agent target from the Baltimore Ravens, and for good reason. At 25 years old, he fits a timeline that aligns with a long-term rebuild of the line rather than a temporary patch. Pairing a younger center with recent draft investments and competition among interior linemen like Graham Glasgow's successors, Miles Frazier, and Giovanni Manu-type developmental pieces creates a path toward an offensive line that could realistically hold together for a decade. The message is clear. Bite the bullet now, absorb the transition, and build it the right way instead of trying to survive year to year. Defensively, the conversation is just as blunt. The inability to consistently generate pressure opposite Aiden Hutchinson has haunted this team all season. The names being discussed for availability underscore how desperate the need has become. Pass rushers like Trey Hendrickson, Khalil Mack, Jalen Phillips, and Arden Key represent the type of veteran presence Detroit has failed to secure in recent cycles. What fans are asking for is not complicated. They want someone on the other edge who is not Marcus Davenport, someone who can actually stay on the field and affect the quarterback. That single failure has had ripple effects across the entire defense. Responsibility for the season's collapse is not being placed on one individual, and that honesty matters. Brad Holmes is criticized for failing to secure pass rush depth and for drafting injured players that did not provide immediate returns.
Dan Campbell's in-game decisions are part of the problem. Injuries piled up, players dropped passes, free agency misfires hurt. When you combine all of it, the result is exactly what fans watched unfold. It was not one fatal blow. It was a slow bleed. At linebacker, the future is also shifting. Alex Anzalone is not expected to return. With limited cap space and multiple free agents, retaining him would be difficult even if the team wanted to. There is a belief that Detroit needs to get faster at the position, and while Anzalone brought leadership, the speed element appears to be slipping. Jack Campbell's presence softens the blow, but it does not eliminate the need for change. This is another example of the Lions choosing direction over comfort. When it comes to quarterback, the stance is firm. Jared Goff remains the starter. Drafting a quarterback early this year is not the plan. Goff is 31, under contract, and not the immediate issue. The priority is building the trenches first. With the Lions currently sitting around the middle of the first round, the expectation is offensive line or edge rusher, not a developmental quarterback. That conversation may return next year, but not now. All of this paints a picture of an offseason that will not be flashy but will be foundational. This team does not have time to develop inexperienced coaches either. The idea of hiring coordinators who have already done the job before, especially on defense, reflects urgency. There is a belief that this roster window demands execution now, not learning curves. This is where the first part of this story leaves us. a Lions team standing at a crossroads, forced to get younger in the trenches, forced to find real pass rush help, and forced to accept that familiar faces may be gone for good. Do you believe this direction is the right one for Detroit, or do you think the Lions are risking too much by committing to such a hard reset at key positions? Continuing from that point, what makes this moment so critical is that the Lions no longer have the luxury of pretending these decisions can be delayed. The roster structure, the cap situation, and the performance on the field have all collided at the same time. This is why the conversation keeps circling back to urgency. The Lions are not a team with endless margin for error anymore. Every miss now sets them back multiple seasons, not just one. One of the clearest examples of this urgency shows up in how the coaching staff and front office are being evaluated. There's a strong sense that Detroit cannot afford to experiment with coordinators who are still learning on the job. The offense, despite having talent, has lacked consistency and direction at key moments, which is why the discussion around bringing in an offensive coordinator with long-term experience keeps gaining traction. Names like Brian Daboll are mentioned not as wishful thinking, but as a representation of the type of profile the Lions should be targeting. Someone who has done this before, understands situational football, and can stabilize an offense that has too often stalled when it mattered most. On the defensive side, the tone is even sharper. The idea of hiring a defensive coordinator who has already proven himself is not about splash, it is about survival. This team cannot spend another season waiting for a system to click. The reference to Brian Flores reflects a desire for accountability, structure, and immediate impact. Whether or not that specific name becomes realistic is less important than what it represents. The Lions want results now, not promises. The final game against Chicago only reinforced these truths. Even though the outcome does not change Detroit's postseason fate, it affects draft position and schedule placement. The expectation is not a miracle win, but a smarter use of snaps. The emphasis is on giving reps to players who are likely to be part of the future. Younger contributors, rotational pieces, and players who have not seen meaningful action all season need to be on the field. This is not about pride. It is about information. The Lions must leave this game knowing exactly who can be trusted moving forward. Chicago, on the other hand, is playing meaningful football. They are trending upward, operating with momentum, and executing at a higher level. That contrast alone tells you where Detroit stands right now. The Bears are pushing forward. The Lions are taking inventory. That is a painful realization, but an honest one. Another critical layer to all of this is depth. Throughout the season, injuries exposed how thin this roster truly is in key areas. When starters went down, the drop-off was immediate and severe. That is not bad luck. That is roster construction. It explains why pass rush depth, offensive line youth, and linebacker speed are recurring themes. These are not random talking points. They are lessons learned the hard way. What makes this offseason different from previous ones is that there is no illusion of being one move away. The Lions are not a single free agent signing away from contention. They are not a coordinator tweak away from fixing everything. This is a multi-layered correction, and it starts with admitting that the foundation cracked under pressure. At the same time, there's a path forward that actually makes sense. Getting younger on the offensive line, even if it hurts in the short term, sets up long-term stability. Adding a legitimate edge rusher opposite Aiden Hutchinson changes the entire structure of the defense. Bringing in experienced coordinators reduces volatility. None of this guarantees success, but it gives the Lions a real chance instead of false hope. This is the crossroads moment fans talk about years later. Either the Lions lean fully into this reset with conviction, or they hesitate and end up stuck in the same cycle. There is no middle ground anymore. The decisions made in the next few months will define not just next season, but the direction of the franchise for years. Now I want to hear from you. Do you agree that the Lions need to prioritize youth in the trenches and proven experience on the coaching staff, or do you think there is another path they should be taking that we are not talking about enough? Picking up from there, the deeper issue fans need to sit with is how fragile the Lions' competitive window actually proved to be once adversity hit. When things were clean early on, this roster could function, but the moment injuries mounted and matchups got tougher, the structure underneath started to show cracks. That is why so many of these conversations keep circling back to fundamentals instead of surface-level fixes. You cannot scheme your way out of a broken pass rush. You cannot outplay aging or unavailable offensive linemen over a full season, and you cannot expect consistency when depth is thin and roles are unclear. What stands out most is that this offseason is not being framed as a rebuild in name, but it quietly functions like one in execution. The Lions are not tearing everything down, but they are being pushed into replacing core pieces all at once. Losing Frank Ragnow is not just losing a center, it is losing the anchor of the offensive line. Potentially losing Taylor Decker compounds that impact. That combination alone forces a philosophical shift in how this offense will be built moving forward. Instead of continuity, the focus becomes transition and long-term alignment. This is also why the emphasis on the draft cannot be overstated. Sitting around the middle of the first round puts Detroit in a position where they must be precise. There is little room for error. A miss on an offensive lineman or an edge rusher is not just a wasted pick, it delays the entire reset. The expectation is not instant stardom, but immediate contribution and durability. That standard applies across the board now, because the Lions cannot afford developmental dead years anymore. Another layer fans should pay attention to is how roles are being evaluated internally. The push to get younger players more reps late in the season is not symbolic. It is diagnostic. The coaching staff needs to know who can handle NFL speed, who breaks down under pressure, and who belongs in the long-term plan. That evaluation will quietly determine who stays, who gets extended, and who is allowed to walk without hesitation. What makes this moment emotionally difficult for fans is that many of the names being discussed are respected figures in the locker room. Leadership matters, but availability and performance matter more when a team is trying to climb out of mediocrity. The Lions are being forced to choose between sentiment and sustainability, and history shows that franchises that hesitate at this point usually pay for it later. The same logic applies to coaching decisions. Experience is being prioritized because mistakes are no longer acceptable growing pains. The front office understands that another season of miscommunication, late adjustments, or schematic confusion could waste what remains of this core. That is why the tone around coordinator hires feels different this time. It is less hopeful and more demanding. At the end of all this, what fans are really watching is accountability finally catching up to the organization. Every weakness exposed during the season is now demanding a response. There is no hiding behind potential or blaming bad luck. The Lions are staring directly at what failed, and the response to those failures will define whether this team takes a step forward or slips backward. So now the question shifts from what went wrong to what you believe must happen next. Should the Lions fully commit to rebuilding the trenches even if it means short-term pain, or do you think there is a way to stay competitive while making these changes? What comes next in this discussion is the part that usually makes fans uncomfortable, because it forces an honest look at expectations. For a long time, Lions fans have been trained to hope that progress happens naturally, that continuity alone will solve problems. This season challenged that belief. Continuity did not protect the roster from collapse when pressure increased. Familiar faces did not automatically elevate performance. That realization is why this offseason feels heavier than others. It is not about patience anymore, it is about precision. The front office is now operating in a space where every move has a consequence that compounds quickly. Cap flexibility is limited. There are multiple free agents. There are clear positional holes. That combination means prioritization becomes everything. You cannot fix everything at once, so the order in which decisions are made matters just as much as the decisions themselves. The message emerging from this evaluation is that the trenches must come first, even if that frustrates fans who want immediate fireworks. This also reframes how the Lions should be judged next season. The standard cannot simply be wins and losses. It has to be structural improvement. Does the offensive line hold up physically over the course of the year? Does the defense generate pressure without having to manufacture it? Do younger players look like legitimate long-term pieces instead of temporary fillers? Those questions will matter more than a hot start or a short winning streak. Another overlooked element is how leadership evolves when a roster turns over. When veteran anchors leave, new voices have to emerge. That transition can be messy if not handled carefully. This is where coaching stability and experience become even more important. A locker room full of younger players needs clear standards and accountability, not mixed messages or shifting philosophies. That is another reason the Lions appear determined to bring in coordinators who have been through this cycle before. Fans should also brace for moves that may not make sense emotionally but will make sense on paper. Letting players walk, declining extensions, or choosing draft prospects over familiar names will feel cold, but this is often how franchises break out of stagnation. The Lions are being pushed into acting like a team that understands its window is fragile and must be protected with smart, sometimes uncomfortable decisions. At its core, this offseason is about identity. Are the Lions going to be a team that reacts, or a team that plans? The information is there. The weaknesses are no longer hidden. What matters now is whether the organization has the discipline to follow through when the easy choice conflicts with the right one. This is not the end of the story. It is the setup. The moves that follow will either validate this evaluation or expose it as another missed opportunity. And that is why fan voices matter right now. The pressure, the expectations, and the conversation around this team are all part of what shapes accountability. At this stage of the conversation, the focus naturally shifts to trust, because talent acquisition and schematic fixes only work if the decision makers stay consistent when pressure builds. What derailed this season was not a lack of belief, it was a lack of insulation when things went wrong. The Lions learned, in real time, how thin the line is between optimism and exposure. When injuries hit, when matchups turned unfavorable, there was no safety net. That lesson cannot be ignored without consequences. This is why the word discipline keeps coming up internally and among fans who are paying close attention. Discipline in roster building means resisting the temptation to chase names that do not fit the timeline. Discipline in coaching hires means valuing experience over comfort. Discipline in the draft means taking the less glamorous pick if it solidifies the foundation. None of these choices win headlines in March, but they decide whether December looks different next year. There is also a reality fans should prepare for. Progress may not look linear. Even if the Lions do many things right this offseason, there will be growing pains. A younger offensive line will have moments where communication breaks down. A retooled defense will take time to establish chemistry. That does not mean the plan is failing. It means the plan is being executed. The mistake would be panicking at the first sign of friction and abandoning the process halfway through. What should encourage fans is that the problems are now clearly identified. This is not a team guessing at its weaknesses. The Lions know they need more speed on defense. They know they need durability and youth up front. They know they need coaches who can adjust on the fly. Awareness does not guarantee success, but it eliminates denial, and denial is what has buried this franchise in the past. Another critical piece is how this organization responds publicly versus privately. It is easy to say the right things in press conferences. It is harder to let actions align with those statements when hard choices come due. The offseason will quietly reveal whether the Lions are truly aligned from ownership to coaching staff to front office. Mixed signals usually show up quickly in roster construction. For fans, this is the moment where engagement actually matters. Conversations, criticism, and expectations create pressure. Pressure forces clarity. This fan base has waited long